Hello everyone, welcome back to my second channel, and today I'm going to do a belated reading rush wrap up. In case you haven't noticed, it's been about a month since the reading rush ended and a couple weeks since I said I would do a reading rush wrap up, and now that I have gotten a few other creative things out of the way, I finally have some time because I really do want to talk about the things that I experienced over the week and things I've been thinking about now in the weeks since. In case you are new here, my name is Helen. I make videos. This is actually my second channel. I do have a main channel, Film Geek 520, where I upload women in film reviews every other Thursday. Those are reviews where I talk about a film directed by a woman. I just began season 2 of Women in Film Reviews with Birds of Prey. That was a really good discussion and I had a blast talking about it. For the next Woman in Film review, I'm going to be talking about The Farewell by Lulu Wang. Additionally, I have a brand new Patreon now that you can find linked in the description below, and I have a brand new website, helen-groothuis.com. I will link the channel trailer down below that has a lot more information. And let's dive into the reading rush. So the first thing that I want to address with the reading rush before I get into my own personal experience is the controversy surrounding a few aspects of this year's reading rush. In case you are unaware of what kind of happened this year and how it fell apart a little bit, I'll link to some more in-depth discussions down below. But the fact of the matter is that there were a lot of accusations of Ariel and Raylene, who head up the reading rush, of being a bit insensitive towards issues of race. These include putting out the official reading rush challenges on Juneteenth. If you're not aware of what Juneteenth is, you should be by now, but just in case, that is a holiday in the African American community that celebrates the official end of slavery in the United States. Ariel and Raylene put their reading rush challenges out on that day, and a lot of people accused them of being insensitive. Another reason that there was a bit of controversy this year is that there was a book club pick that was by an author of color, and they were going to finish it and host a live stream discussing it. They did not finish it, and they kind of laughed it off, and a lot of people thought that that was very insensitive to something that they were going to highlight. They were going to highlight an author of color, and then they just didn't commit to it and they didn't follow through, and they kind of laughed it off. And that was a real letdown for people who did actually finish the book and did want to have a meaningful discussion. There is also the matter of the Reading Outside Challenge, which of course, due to the coronavirus pandemic, was going to be not only harder to do, but would in some cases go against some particular countries' regulations. And instead of coming up with something else, which would have been quite easy to do, I think, they were just like, well, find some way to, get around it or make something up, like a book that takes place outside, or if you have a balcony, read on a balcony. And of course, not everybody has that. So a lot of people accuse them of being insensitive because of that. The book club pick was the thing that caught a lot of people's attention, and they did put out an apology. I don't quite know what to think about the apology. The thing that kind of got me about that is that in regards to the Juneteenth accusation, they said that they were Canadian and didn't really know about it. I find that to be a bit of a flimsy excuse, especially this year, because a lot of people online were talking about it in the weeks coming up to Juneteenth, and especially given the really big resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement in the aftermath of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, whose killers, by the way, have still not been arrested. Please keep saying her name. I will admit that I did not know what Juneteenth or the significance of it was until probably about 2018 at the earliest. So I can totally understand somebody growing up very ignorant of it if they have never had to deal with issues of race. But that also does not excuse not going out of your way to do your research or not knowing what Juneteenth was prior. As far as the rest of the apology, I don't think it was the greatest apology in the world. It had a very "I'm sorry if we offended you" vibe. It is also not my apology to accept and to forgive, because I was not a member of the community that was perceiving a slight against them. So that's my opinion on that. My personal thoughts are, I did like the idea of sitting down and actively reading things for a week. I think that there are other challenges, and people have brought these up, that maybe I want to participate in another time, and maybe I won't do the reading rush next year unless some really actionable and perceivable change has been made on the part of Ariel and Raylene, and that they've done some educating for themselves. That's all I'll say on that. That being said, I did complete the reading rush this year, and I do want to talk about the process I went through, and of course, the books that I read. So let's start with my process. If you watched my day in the life video, I did talk a little bit more about how I approached the reading rush. I'd like to go over that a little bit again here. Instead of just reading one book and then another book and then another book, I decided to take the 4 books that I classified as priority reads and to read chunks of them each day. So I was in effect reading 4 books at the same time. I divided the number of pages up, and I kept track of how many pages per day I needed to read to finish the books on time. I'm also a completionist, so I never stopped in the middle of a chapter. I always finished the said chapter, and a lot of times that meant that the reading average would go down, and it also meant that sometimes I read larger chunks per day than I anticipated. Here is my list. You probably can't see it super close up, but I kept track of pages for Victoria, The Memory of Fire, The Rise of the Rocket Girls, and Emma. I started out needing 82 pages a day for Victoria, 61 pages a day for The Memory of Fire, Rise of the Rocket Girls needed 42 pages a day, and Emma needed 39 pages a day. And I kept track of the total pages I read each day for completionist's sake. Those numbers kept going down, and by the time Sunday rolled around, I actually had a lot less pages to read because I had been a completionist, and I found time to complete the 5th book in my priority reads, which meant that I finished all the categories. The reason I chose this method is that I knew from my college days that trying to read one book continuously, especially if it's a long one in one setting, tends to make me quite bored and sleepy, and I wanted to feel like I was accomplishing more instead of continuously being like, oh God, I have 6 more books to read, I have 5 more books to read, I am never gonna finish this. This was a way for me to feel accomplished, and it was also a way for me to kind of change my day up. The genres that I'm reading were quite different from each other. I had 2 fiction, 2 nonfiction, and a comic book. Even the 2 nonfictions were very different, the 2 fiction were very different. I feel like I chose a good variety, and I kept changing the order that I read them into. Some days I would read Victoria first, sometimes I would read Rise of the Rocket Girls first, sometimes I'd end with Emma, sometimes I'd end with Memory of Fire, and so on. And I tried to change that up. That ended up working out quite well for me because I did finish all 4 plus the comic book. And let's talk about them. So first up, we have Victoria by A.N. Wilson. As I mentioned in my TBR video, this is the inspiration for the Victoria TV series starring Jenna Coleman. I quite enjoyed this. I do enjoy that it has some photographs of the royal family as well. It is a very interesting look at how the 19th century played out through the lens of the royal family and the alliances that they formed. I certainly learned a lot about how the world was shaping up during that time. I really got a scope for just the huge amount of influence that she had over the continent and how that kind of fed into World War I when it came around about a little over a decade after her death. She is also a quite fascinating woman. I feel like the TV series has a bit more rose-colored glasses on her legacy, but that might just be because they were covering her younger years at the moment and they haven't gotten to post Albert's death. But it's a really fascinating portrait, and if you've got a good chunk of time on your hands, because it is big, although the last 100 pages or so are just sources and notes, definitely have a look at this if you're a history buff. The next book that I read as part of the reading rush was Callie Bates's The Memory of Fire. This is actually a sequel to a book that I got about 4 years ago called The Waking Land. I really enjoyed The Waking Land, and for some reason I kept putting off reading the sequel. I think it's because I was a little unsure about Alana not being the main protagonist in this one. It's a really interesting story. I really like how it continues the spirit of the first book without sacrificing getting to know the characters more and getting to know more of the world. That was really fascinating for me. This is incredibly well-written fantasy, and not long after finishing that, I actually ordered the third book, which is another protagonist. I am currently in the middle of reading this. I'm reading this in slow chunks, so this is a really great series, I'm not gonna lie, and I'm so happy that it exists. The third book that I read as part of my priority reads was, of course, Emma. I forgot to mention the previous books counted for the first book that I touched as part of the reading rush and a book that starts with the word the. So those are those two categories. Emma filled two categories. It has green on the cover, which meant that it counted for my birthstone, which is emerald. This also counted for a book that you haven't read that a movie that you have seen is based on. And of course, there's the 2020 Emma, which I actually watched in the middle of reading this because I remembered liking the film so much. The book is just as good. Of course, the movie Clueless, also based on this, so you can pick out those story beats there. That makes it a bit easier to follow. The thing that I found a bit challenging with this one, of course, just so you are aware, this is the complete Jane Austen. I did not read every single page in this book during the reading rush. I probably would have died. The problem for me is it technically had the lowest number of average pages needed a day, but the font, if you can't see right there, is super tiny, and so it got quite tedious. This is one that I definitely had to listen to music to get me through it, but it is really enjoyable, and it's really cool to see how much of the dialogue from this book made it into the Autumn to Wild movie that came out this year. Overall, I have now read, I think, 4 Jane Austen books, and you really get a sense of her writing style and how it's changed through Emma and Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion, and of course Sense and Sensibility. Yeah, if you need a little bit of classical literature but you want to have a little bit of fun, Emma's the way to go. The fourth book that I read as a priority read in chunks was Rise of the Rocket Girls, The Women Who Propelled Us, From Missiles to the Moon and Mars. This is by Natalia Holtz. This tells the story of the first women to work in the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and then of course NASA. They were hugely instrumental in getting our spacecraft into space because they were human computers, which is so radical to think about now as someone who grew up in the 90s and in the internet age, because it's the meaning of the word computer has been lost a little bit. If you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, this is kind of on a similar note, although it doesn't focus specifically on the African American community. And these women focused primarily on non-manned missions, so things like satellites, the Voyager probe, a million other things. This book does a really great job of balancing the work that they did with their personal lives and the relationships that they had with each other and with their colleagues at JPL. So it's a really nice mix. This was by far the easiest book to read, probably because it had the biggest font. It was probably the most reader accessible of the things I read. So oftentimes, if I didn't feel like starting out with a really difficult book, I would often pick this up. Rise of the Rocket Girls, by the way, counted for a book that takes place on a continent that you are not living on at the moment. So, North America. I live in Europe. Finally, I had a bit of time on Sunday to crank out a book that I read outside, as well as a book that is in my least read genre. My husband has an X-Men compilation graphic novel. This is an origin story of the team of X-Men that includes Jean Grey, Beast, Iceman, Cyclops, and Angel, I think. I'm not too big of a comic person. It was fine. I read it out on the river near my house. It took me a good 30-40 minutes to get through. It wasn't the warmest of days. I don't know if I'll read many more comics after this. This was just kind of a one-off read. I didn't hate it. I just feel a bit indifferent about it, and I more or less have it here so I could complete 2 of the challenges. Some of the benefits that I found from this process were, 1, I read a lot more than I had to, and I read for fun, quote unquote, more than I had done in the past year. Of course, I got to check out some very new and interesting books, and that would point me in the directions of some more things that I would like to learn about. There were some downsides, however. 1, it could get to be a very long and tedious process. There were times where my brain at the end of the day was just fried and I could not focus on anything else. Sometimes my eyes would hurt. As I said, with books like Emma and with Victoria, those could be a bit of a difficulty to get those chunks done during the day. Another thing that I kept kind of feeling during this reading rush was I felt like it was taking up so many hours of my day, sometimes up to 8 or 9, maybe even 10, depending on how much I had to read. And I felt like I wasn't spending as much time with my husband as I should have, especially because we had just moved and everything else was super stressful around us. Among other takeaways, I was online a lot less, which I think did me a bit of good. I wasn't just mindlessly scrolling Twitter or Instagram or Tumblr or anything like that. I have in my notes that I said I'm more motivated to read more books after not reading for a while. I don't know if that's necessarily true, especially because I haven't really read any books since this ended. I have started The Soul of Power, which is the sequel to The Memory of Fire, but I feel like I put my brain through so much reading that by the end of it, it was just kind of done with reading for a while. I don't think I'll be done with reading forever, obviously, but I think putting that much effort in kind of broke my brain a little bit, and the next time I do kind of a reading challenge, I feel like I need to choose one that's a bit less tedious. Again, with the controversy that has come up around the reading rush this year, I don't know if I will do this particular reading challenge again for the controversy reasons as well as some of the other reasons that I mentioned, but I am open to doing a reading challenge of some sort. I was really appreciative of the community, or at least the small slice that I experienced. I didn't dive into it too much because, again, I was reading. Bottom line, make sure to do your research, because I just found the reading rush and decided the day before it started that I was going to do it. I feel like next time I do this, I need to do a little bit more research around the people doing it, and of course, the prep I need to do going into it. So I think I will end my thoughts there. Thank you guys so much for watching. It's been a great experience to go through the reading rush and to go through it with you guys. Let me know some of your thoughts about the reading rush in the comments down below. You can subscribe here for more personal content as and when I make it, but you can also subscribe to Film Geek 520, my main channel. That has a much more regular schedule. As I say, I'm going to be putting out women in film reviews every other Thursday. I also have a couple of brand new huge announcements. One, I have a brand new website, helen-groothuis.com, that I collaborated with Fallon from Foundation Social Media and Marketing on. It's beautiful. I'm so proud of it. I will put the website as well as links to Fallon's work in the description. I have also launched my very own Patreon page. For £5 a month, you can support me in making the content that you like to watch, as well as get a few extra goodies. I made a channel trailer on Film Geek 520 that explains a lot more about that. That will be linked in the description as well, and you can go to patreon.com/Helen Groothuis for more information. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at HelenMarie95, on Instagram at HelenMarie_95, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Helen Groothuis Writer. As always, thank you for watching. Remember to keep living awesome lives, and I will see you all very soon. Bye.